My name is Natalie Hart, and I was 34 years old when my marriage quietly began to unravel. Not with shouting or betrayal confessed, but with a stranger's calm warning in an ordinary Chicago cafe. It was a gray afternoon in River North. Rain clung to coats hung on chairbacks, and the air smelled of over-roasted coffee beans. Office workers murmured over laptops. Nothing about the setting suggested that my life was about to split cleanly down the middle. Yet the moment the man across from me spoke my husband's name, the world felt suddenly narrower. He introduced himself as Daniel Reed. His voice was steady, his posture composed, as if this conversation had been rehearsed not for drama, but for survival. "Your husband is involved with my wife," he said. The words landed without sound. I didn't gasp or cry. What settled inside me was colder than shock. Confirmation. Suspicion floats. Proof sinks. Daniel placed a sealed envelope between us but didn't open it. Instead, he met my eyes and said something I wouldn't understand until much later. "If you act first," he said, "you lose." My hands rested calmly on the table, though my heart was racing. I had imagined discovering the truth countless times, always picturing myself emotional and unrestrained. Instead, I felt focused, alert in a way fear sometimes creates. Daniel spoke quietly, explaining that courts don't respond to pain, only to evidence. Acting too soon, he warned, protects the people who lied. Waiting, carefully, protects the truth. I nodded without fully grasping the weight of what he was offering. When we stood to leave, he slid the envelope closer. "You don't have to decide anything today," he said. "Just don't rush." I didn't know it then, but that moment, mundane and restrained, was the instant my life stopped drifting and began moving with intention. Before everything cracked, I believed my marriage was stable. I had been married to Eric Whitaker for 7 years. He worked long hours in logistics, predictable, structured, dependable. I worked remotely as a localization specialist, translating documents from our kitchen table with the radio humming softly nearby. We weren't dramatic people. No public declarations, no surprise getaways. Our relationship was built on routine: grocery shopping Saturdays, takeout Fridays, movies on the couch where Eric always fell asleep before the ending. Eric wasn't romantic, but he was reliable. Bills were paid, repairs were handled, voices were never raised. I mistook that steadiness for devotion. I told myself that quiet meant safe. Looking back, I realize how easily silence can disguise distance. The changes came gradually, layered so gently into our days that I questioned my own instincts. Eric began coming home later, first 9, then 10, then close to midnight. He blamed new contracts and shifting deadlines. I believed him because his job always demanded more at inconvenient times. Then his phone habits changed. It used to lie face up on the counter. Now it stayed face down or hidden away. When messages arrived, he glanced quickly and turned the screen from view. A new scent appeared in our bathroom: cologne. Eric had never worn any in 7 years. When I asked, he shrugged it off as a free sample from work. His clothes became sharper, his haircuts more deliberate. He switched from his old neighborhood barber to a salon downtown. None of these things were suspicious alone. People change. What troubled me was the timing. Weekends shifted too. He started going to the gym late mornings, returning freshly showered and oddly energized. Not tired, not sore, just lighter, happier. At home, his messages grew shorter. Replies took hours. When he spoke, his words carried less warmth, like someone answering out of obligation rather than interest. If you've ever felt a home grow colder without a single argument, you understand. Nothing loud enough to accuse, everything quiet enough to doubt yourself. The moment certainty arrived came on an ordinary weekday evening. I was having dinner with a friend near the Loop, seated by a window reflecting traffic lights and passing umbrellas. Mid-conversation, my attention snagged on a familiar shape across the street. Eric. He was seated inside a cafe, leaning toward a woman with dark hair and a wine-colored coat. Relief flickered until I saw his smile. Not the tired one he brought home. This one was relaxed, open, alive. Then he reached across the table and took her hand. It wasn't dramatic, it was practiced, familiar. My body froze. I didn't stand or shout. The restaurant noise faded until all I could hear was my own breathing. My friend followed my gaze, gripped my arm, and insisted we leave. I went home alone. The apartment felt staged that night, like a set built for a life I was no longer part of. Eric came home after midnight, speaking casually, asking why I was still awake. His voice was calm, too calm. I asked about work. He answered easily and disappeared into the shower. That was when I decided something fundamental. I would not react, not yet. From the next morning, I lived two lives. On the surface, I was unchanged. Coffee made, questions asked, good nights exchanged. Underneath, I observed. I documented times, excuses, patterns. I didn't invade his privacy. I didn't follow him. I only recorded what was already visible. Once, when he claimed a late night at the office, I drove past his building. His car wasn't there. Another time, he mentioned the gym. I later checked the membership login history. One visit. That was when I understood how heavy unproven truth can be. Like hearing an alarm without seeing smoke. You can't relax, but you can't escape either. I quietly met with a divorce attorney. After listening, he told me what I didn't want to hear. Suspicion isn't evidence, he said. Confrontation teaches liars how to hide better. So I waited. Daniel Reed re-entered my life on a Tuesday afternoon. He arrived with a folder and no wasted words. Inside were photographs, dates, locations. Eric and the same woman, Brooke Lancaster, together in places they claimed not to be. Daniel had documented everything carefully, legally. Relief and grief collided inside me. Before leaving, Daniel said one thing that reframed everything. "There's more coming," he said, "but timing is everything." 3 days later, he called again, and this time he had a plan. When Daniel called 3 days later, his voice sounded different, more measured, more deliberate. The shock phase had passed for him. What remained was precision. We met again at the same cafe in River North, the same smell of coffee, the same low conversations. Daniel was already seated when I arrived. He didn't stand. He waited until I sat down, then reached under the table and placed a rigid black case beside his chair. It landed with a dull weight that made my stomach tighten. He didn't open it immediately. "Before I show you what's inside," Daniel said, "you need to understand this isn't about revenge. It's about timing." Then he lifted the lid. Inside were stacks of cash, neatly bound. I didn't need to count it to know it was substantial. My first reaction was anger. The sight felt wrong, insulting even. "I'm not for sale," I said sharply. Daniel nodded as if he had expected that response. "This isn't a bribe," he replied. "It's compensation for endurance." He explained carefully. If I filed for divorce now, Eric would panic. Panic would reach Brooke. They would erase messages, change routines, rewrite timelines. Evidence that was clean today would become distorted tomorrow. Waiting would do the opposite. Patterns would deepen. Habits would grow careless. Proof would multiply. Daniel planned to wait 3 more months before filing. During that time, he would continue documenting everything through legal channels. He asked only one thing of me. "Don't move first," he said. "No confrontations, no emotional messages, just live normally and share what already exists." I asked him why my involvement mattered so much. "Because if your husband gets nervous," he answered, "he warns my wife, and everything collapses." Our situations were tied together. One wrong move from either of us would protect the people who had lied. The money wasn't payment for silence. It was space. Freedom to think clearly instead of reacting from pain. I agreed to wait. Not because of the cash, but because I wanted the truth to end this properly, with facts, not fury. The weeks that followed demanded a discipline I didn't know I possessed. Nothing in my routine changed. I still made breakfast, still asked neutral questions, still smiled when expected. To anyone watching, our marriage appeared intact. Privately, I documented. Daniel and I established rules. No assumptions, no emotional language, only dates, times, locations. Verifiable facts. If it couldn't be proven, it wasn't shared. When Eric said he was working late, Daniel quietly confirmed Brooke left her office at the same time. When Eric claimed a business trip, Daniel checked flight records. Patterns began overlapping with alarming consistency. One afternoon, while searching for a utility bill, I found a lease tucked behind old paperwork. A 2-bedroom condo in Evanston. Eric was the sole signer. The lease began weeks before he ever mentioned work stress or long commutes. I photographed every page and returned it exactly where I found it. Daniel's response was immediate. "You did everything right," he said. "Evidence only matters when it's clean." No scenes, no accusations, no digital footprints that could be challenged. We treated everything like an audit. Eric grew more relaxed at home. His guard dropped. He believed his life was neatly divided into separate compartments. That was his mistake. One evening, he mentioned a short work trip to Tampa. 3 days. I wished him a safe flight without hesitation. Daniel confirmed Brooke booked the same dates. That was when I understood something crucial. Silence isn't weakness when it's intentional. Sometimes silence is preparation. By the time Eric returned from Florida, I wasn't searching for proof anymore. I was organizing it. He came home relaxed, careless. He brought a small airport gift and complained about exhausting meetings. I thanked him and placed the box on the counter. My expression didn't change. Inside, I already knew where he stayed and who shared his bed. Hotel logs, shared meals, entry timestamps, photos of them moving together like a couple with nothing to hide. It was no longer an affair, it was a shared life. A week later, Eric introduced a new idea. The commute was draining him, he said. Maybe renting a small place closer to work during the week made sense. He watched my reaction closely. I nodded and told him to do what he felt was best. That decision opened the final door. Daniel confirmed Brooke moved into the same condo. Parking records showed both cars overnight. Utility accounts activated in both names. Grocery purchases appeared on the same days. They weren't sneaking anymore. They were cohabiting. That mattered. Cohabitation removes ambiguity. It turns excuses into facts. We chose a Monday morning, 10 a.m. Both attorneys were ready. Both cases were filed within minutes of each other. No warning, no confrontation. By Wednesday, the papers were served. Eric called me repeatedly, his voice tight with panic. He rushed home, clutching stamped documents, hands shaking. I told him calmly that I knew everything. The condo, the trip, the records, the photographs. When I told him Brooke's husband filed the same day, his face collapsed. That night, the house was silent. Not the silence of avoidance, but the silence of exposure. For the first time in months, the truth had nowhere left to hide. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I slept. The weeks after the filings passed quietly, stripped of drama but heavy with consequence. There were no shouting matches, no public scenes, no emotional confessions that changed anything. Once the truth surfaced, everything became procedural. Eric tried to negotiate almost immediately. His attorney reached out with proposals that sounded reasonable on paper: clean separations, quick resolutions, polite language designed to minimize damage. But beneath the surface, those offers avoided responsibility. They treated betrayal like a misunderstanding rather than a choice. Daniel's wife did the same. They both wanted the story to end quickly, quietly, and conveniently. People who are caught often want forgiveness without accountability. We declined. The court process was slow but methodical. Hearings were scheduled weeks apart. There were no speeches, no emotional testimonies, only documents. Evidence does not raise its voice, it simply exists. Photographs were entered into record, dates stamped, locations verified. Financial trails followed predictable patterns. Lease agreements showed timelines that contradicted sworn statements. Travel records dismantled excuses one entry at a time. When explanations were offered, timestamps disagreed. When blame shifted, signed documents told a different story. The judge never asked how we felt. He asked what could be proven. And it could all be proven. The ruling came on a Thursday morning. The marriage was dissolved with responsibility clearly assigned. Asset division reflected that responsibility. Damages were awarded, not as revenge, but as acknowledgement of harm done through deception. Eric moved out the following week. He packed quietly, efficiently, like someone completing a task rather than leaving a life. There were no dramatic apologies, only one brief moment when he stopped at the door and said he was sorry. I accepted the apology without reopening the past. Closure does not require reconciliation. It requires honesty, and honesty had already arrived too late. After he left, the apartment felt different, lighter, almost unfamiliar. I opened the windows for the first time in months. I repainted the walls a softer color. I reclaimed the kitchen table where I used to work while worrying at the same time. The silence changed. Before it had been heavy, filled with things unsaid. Now it was clean. Daniel and I spoke once more after everything finalized. There was no celebration between us. Just relief. Mutual understanding. Two people who had endured something difficult without losing themselves to it. We didn't stay in contact. That chapter had served its purpose. What surprised me most wasn't the legal outcome. It was how quickly my body recovered once the truth was no longer buried inside it. I slept through the night again. My appetite returned. The constant tension in my shoulders eased. Healing didn't arrive as a dramatic breakthrough. It came quietly, like peace reclaiming its space. Looking back, there are things I wish someone had told me earlier. Trust patterns more than promises. Consistency matters more than reassurance. Do not confront when you are confused. Confront when you are prepared. Protect your finances, protect your documents, protect your dignity quietly and early. Silence is not weakness when it is intentional. Waiting does not mean accepting. It means choosing the moment that protects you. I didn't win because I waited. I won because I waited with purpose. This story is not about revenge. It's about self-respect, supported by evidence. It's about understanding that reacting from pain often benefits the people who caused it, while patience, used wisely, restores control. If you are standing at the edge of a truth you are not ready to face, know this. You don't owe anyone an immediate reaction. You owe yourself clarity. Sometimes the strongest move is not the loudest one. Sometimes the most powerful response is preparation. And sometimes walking away with dignity is the cleanest ending of all.